taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear it one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Massa Vulture's mountain and Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks, great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara, looked upon the very practice, the profound perfection of wisdom, beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage trained wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter lineage wishes to practice the activity, profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no touch, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no element, and so on, up to and including no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, to reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the mantra of equal to unequal, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om, Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised, thus spoken by the Bhagavan. Homage to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. I'm sorry. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas, visualize before me this mandala built on a base, resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings, be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions without the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakama wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
Thank you very much. So we'll spend a moment consolidating our motivation for the session. And this initially involves becoming aware of ourselves, just sitting. And then without any disruption, gently place our mind, our mindfulness upon the breath, observing the breath coming and going. Just feeling that any of the tensions and preoccupations that have sent us swirling through space and time, as it often is the case, we end up in a kind of whirlpool of activities. Feel that we're stepping back from these in these precious moments of quietness. And we now frame our motivation, generating from the very depths of our heart a powerful resolve to share these teachings of Shantideva together in order to enable us to assume the burden of relieving the suffering of each and every sentient being in limitless space. We do this through our gradual progression along the Bodhisattva path. So Shantideva is laying out the precise instructions for doing this. And somehow we've gathered the karmic conditions to be able to determine how to travel this path. And this is a remarkable thing, a remarkable opportunity. So really savor the time that we're going to be able to spend together, considering how best to do this. Thank you. Chursung sent her apologies. She's actually attending a dying patient, and that's actually very apropos to today's session, as we're going to discover the sort of tenderness and responsibility of caring for someone in that situation is really taking us to the very essence of what we're attempting to do here. So I think she is indeed present in that very real sense. And welcome to all those others who wish to listen to the teaching. So I'd like to review the outline because it's been several weeks since we've had an opportunity of doing that. According to Gelt Subje's outlines, we have been dealing with the way of training in meditation on the antidote. And as you'll recall, this involved in protecting the mind with individual antidotes, referring to verses 55 and 56. Then we proceeded to investigate the common antidote, on which I've spent significant time, given its universal application and its impact on how we might consider our practice considered as an integrated whole. My purpose in doing this was to encourage us to venture at least a little toe into these admittedly deep waters, splash it around a little, as it were. But we're not going to do even this much if we don't adequately comprehend how our precious human rebirth is offering us a unique chance, one that we must immediately take advantage of. In the very next verse after the common antidote, Shantideva therefore says, by thinking again and again that after a long time I've won the greatest leisure, likewise I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as the king of mountains, end quote. Which is to say that nothing, no thing, whether internal or external, is to be allowed to prove an impediment to our Dharma undertaking to generate and grow the most precious mind of bodhicitta. No thing, nothing whatsoever. The fact that, as Shantideva indicates, we're to think of this not just once, but over and again is a clear indication that to seize the opportunity offered by a precious human rebirth is not so easily won and is not so easily maintained. How so? Because despite any semblances we have managed to conjure of a genuine renunciation, which means a willingness to surrender our craving for samsara itself, we are so quickly, so readily sucked back into pursuing the habitual pleasures of our senses, a pursuit that is vain because it will yield nothing but more grief and dissatisfaction. Yet, like a fool, we attempt to return to it again and again. The basic problem is that we are chronically overestimating the qualities of those desire objects we're craving. We are grasping at what are, finally, no more than projected figments of our own delirious imaginations. In the noble, detailed explanation of the play, a reference to the title of a sutra, quoted by Shantideva in his training anthology, we find the following. I'm going to quote it at some length. It's very, very poignant and pertinent. Compounded things are impermanent and unstable, perishable by nature, like an unbaked pot, like something borrowed from another person, like a city made of sand. They don't last very long. Compounded things are subject to destruction, like plaster washed away in the rainy season. They are like a sandy riverbank, dependent on conditions, weak by nature. Compounded things are like the flame of a lamp, quickly arising and ceasing, unsteady like the wind, weak with no core, like a ball of foam. Compounded things are motionless and empty. When examined, they are like a mass of plantain trees, like an illusion, confusing the mind, like an empty fist or the idle taunts of fools. Compounded things proceed by means of causes and conditions, mutual causality and dependent arising. Foolish people don't realize this. So the question we have to ask ourselves, are we ourselves to be numbered amongst these foolish people? If we're still attempting to milk the samsaric stone for immediate gratification, as well as long-term fulfillment determined on samsaric principles, we must unfortunately emphatically answer, yes, we are to be numbered amongst those foolish people. Therefore, we will indeed be like those children howling in despair at the loss of their treasured creation. And I quote here Shantideva, chapter 6, 93, the first two lines of the verse. When their sandcastles collapse, children howl in despair. End of quote. So like those disconsolate children, we are constantly throwing emotional tantrums in a bid to regain egoic control. This control is always slipping away from it, and we're always trying to regain it. That we're doing this is a definite sign that we have not comprehended our illusion-like self. We need to accept full responsibility for the situation. Therefore, following his concise, even shorthand reference to the need to recognize our own self, the one to which we cling through the force of innate self-grasping ignorance, as absolutely real, and that we're to recognize these things, including ourselves, as illusion-like in order to escape the kind of tenacity of this compulsive relationship of the afflictions to their objects, if you like. Shantideva now proceeds to break down, dismantle, disempower some of those sandcastle constructions and the corresponding ambitions for dominion and ownership that accompany them. But first, Shantideva offers or utters a cry for us to do this, but more specifically, to do this now. Instead of dancing manically on a bed of constantly shifting, eroding sand, we are to stabilize our current precarious situation, not by seeking to build a concrete floor over the sand, a temporary fix anyhow, but to secure our own minds by making them firm and stable as Mount Meru. And we're to do this by recognizing our precious human rebirth is not to be assumed or taken for granted. At any moment, as that beautiful sutra passage indicates, it will slip away. And with it, our best laid plans and worldly expectations. We think along the lines of, if only, so death is sort of suddenly at the door, we think, if only I'd done my practice on a daily basis, if only I'd done that 3-month retreat I'd promised my special Lama when I took the Bodhisattva initiation. But now I'm dying of cancer and only minutes or moments of this life remain. Oh, poor me, foolish me. I am so terribly miserable right now, etc., etc. We all compose our own plaintive refrains in these situations. I'm just sort of miming a kind of possible one, typical one. So according to Sonam Senmo, we can unlock the meaning of this verse as follows. He says, the first 2 lines are a consideration of the difficulty of acquiring freedom and leisure. The latter 2 indicate not damaging the mind's virtue. End of quote. So this reading, very concise reading, makes great sense. It especially renders the reference to, after a long time I have won, quoting Shantideva, meaningful. It was not won before, or it may have been won, but very, very, very infrequently, for the reason that the conditions, the causes for such a precious human rebirth are extremely difficult to assemble. This fact should render us very humble and grateful that our own past person has offered here right now this fertile chance to practice Dharma. This idea of thanking one's past person, I think, is a very beautiful idea, because it's actually real. We have to thank our past person, but we also have to operate with our present person in order to look after our future person in the same responsible manner. And this isn't, again, for our selfish purpose. Unless we have this kind of security, stability, we're not going to be able to progress systematically and successfully on the path. So the last 2 lines, likewise, I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as a king of mountains, can therefore be considered a clarion call to act ethically, in a manner that will ensure a perpetuation of these rarely accomplished causes, so that we might enjoy a precious human rebirth again in the future, meaning in future lives. This is a kind of span we're to consider. Otherwise, how are we to make a meaningful pursuit of the Bodhisattva path, which must be practiced over a great length of time, to accumulate the required stores of merit and wisdom to achieve the 2 kayas? We have to be realistic about that. In his commentary, Kunzang Pelden proposes firmness or stability also requires avoiding the distracting or even disheveling influence of what he calls nefarious company and the like. So I thought of some examples. If we don't guard our mind in a very deliberate and conscientious manner, we might start to experiment taking drugs, for example, because our best friend or partner is doing so. By engaging thus, we are stepping in stockinged feet upon a very slippery slope, one that has the potential to lead us to forfeit our Bodhisattva resolve and even to plunge us into more increasingly difficult and even dangerous situations. Not only will our addiction, in this case, to sensory pleasure poison us, but it will also destroy the purity of our best virtuous intentions. And we might injure any number of people in the name of our addiction itself, robbing our dear mother, etc. You hear these stories, don't you, with junkies find their mum's cash tin hidden in the back of the wardrobe and plunder it in order to get another fix. And only later does their poor mother open that tin and discover it's empty and realize what her own dear child has done. So I'm not sort of trying to have a solitary war against drugs here. I'm just indicating the problem of addiction, and I'm relating that to sensory addiction in general. So I'm just sort of epitomizing it with this, a very strong example. Geshe Doga, however, always optimistic, is keen to indicate that this verse encourages us to continue in an unabated fashion our practice, even when and if the going gets tough, which it does, of course. In Geshe Doga's words, quote, one aspect of this advice can be how we should not feel discouraged, even if it takes a long time to accumulate certain merits. The results are definitely achieved. So by relating to the good consequences we have obtained now, Geshe Doga continues, it can encourage us to further develop and engage in the practices to gain further good results in the future. This is how we need to maintain the mind, which is free from despondency, and have a courageous mind to continue with the practices and hold our mind firm and stable. End of quote. So discouragement and despondency should be admitted or acknowledged whenever they are in play. But this isn't to mean that we acquiesce to their enervating or even depressive force, although sometimes this might occur. Rather, we need to gather ourselves, regather ourselves, our wherewithal, by reflecting on the inestimable value of the precious human rebirth, together with the difficulty of finding it again, and therefore to determine that we will work to engage in precisely those meritorious, virtuous actions that will ensure, as Geshe Doga so kindly puts it, good results in the future. To seek or wish otherwise is incomprehensible, if not outright perverse. The time, in other words, for arduously building elaborate sandcastles is not when the sea is relentlessly returning to claim its own. We're constantly building sandcastles. They're constantly getting washed away. We're constantly building sandcastles. They're constantly getting washed away. When are we going to stop trying to build those sandcastles? This is the great challenge here. We need, I think, some practical balance here, some sort of psychological stability as well. In his training anthology, Shantideva cautions against becoming infatuated or overly enamored, if you like, with our practice of virtue. in terms of how it might serve ourselves. We are therefore to assess just what is involved in what yoga has called good future results. Because as Shantideva in the training anthology indicates, our purpose in remaining firm is not to benefit ourselves, or rather should not be our primary focus. And the quote from the training anthology reads, "In the same way, you should protect the goodness arisen from previous giving from being taken away by the power of reactive emotions. But you should not hope for any result of evolution from the goodness that comes from giving away your goodness, other than to benefit others. Moreover," he adds, "if you want to protect your goodness, don't regret it afterwards." Referring to regret giving something away and then think, gee, I shouldn't have given that away, I needed it. Such would clearly be a return, or have we ever left it, of self-cherishing, the very antithesis of cherishing others more than ourselves. However, this said, those who have compassion for all sentient beings are quite right, quite legitimately right, if you like, in wishing to personally avoid 4 kinds of rebirth. Again, in his training anthology, Shantideva says, what are the 4? Except in order to help sentient beings to mature, they do not go into situations with no opportunities to practice. This is one condition. They do not go into worlds where there is no Buddha. The second. They do not go into families that hold wrong views. The third. They do not go to any bad rebirths. The fourth. So clearly, one is intent on gaining favorable future circumstances in order to optimize our future capacity to benefit sentient beings and nurture them to enter and progressively flourish on the path. This wish is not a selfish motivation. His Holiness often reiterates this point because people get mixed up. They think that somehow wishing for enlightenment is selfish, sort of concerned with me. It's not the case at all. We have to be skillful in sort of balancing these situations out and not get confused about what we're actually doing. To wish to have one of these conditions of a successful future rebirth, in other words, is entirely responsible, sensible behavior. It is an example of exemplary, skillful means. We must become adept in generating such insightful aims and intentions as which will ripen correspondingly. This is due to the implacable law of the implacable law of cause and effect. So we take this into consideration. We look at the relationship between causes and results, and then we seek to engender the causes in a very, very precise manner. So all of this is imagistically encapsulated with Shantideva's poetic reference to remaining firm like the king of mountains. Even if there's a storm, we're unmoved, aren't we? We do not allow ourselves to slip, especially slip back. Such would be the case if we indulge in even a minor ethical transgression. Perhaps we yelled in frustration at our partner, or who resentfully spurned the love of someone who dearly cares for us, all in the name of some finally trivial grievance or petty issue. We all know these sorts of situations from our own experience. Again, to recap, verse 58 falls under the heading, the way of training in the antidote. And Gyaltsab Sabje succinctly extracts the meaning. Think, after a great climb, which lasted for a long time, I have obtained a precious human rebirth with freedoms and endowments. By contemplating repeatedly the great purpose and rarity of the precious human rebirth, generate the intent to definitely achieve the great purpose, then firmly hold that mind as immovable as Mount Meru. Shantideva, with his impeccable logic, now proceeds to investigate how we might identify what the morality of accumulating virtuous dharmas means and involves. So under the big heading we have the big heading is the way of training in the morality of accumulating virtues, virtuous dharmas. And under that we have two subheadings: abandoning attachment to the body, which is a cause not to train in morality. And secondly, to be skillful in practicing virtue. Abandoning attachment to the body, which is the cause not to train in morality, has 5 subheadings. I'll read them out. An example of why it is unsuitable to be attached to the body, meditating on the impurity of the body, contemplating the lack of essence of the body, the reason why it's unsuitable to be attached to the body, and finally, because the body disintegrates quickly, it is suitable to practice virtue. Verse 59, the next verse we will investigate, pertains to the first subheading, an example for why it is unsuitable to be attached to the body. And the verse reads, "If, mind, you are not made unhappy when this body is dragged and tossed about by vultures greedy for flesh, then why are you so concerned about it now?" Again, Shantideva's intent is transparent. He's asking us to abandon attachment to our bodies, which also means our associated compulsive commitment to bodily or sensual pleasures. Why so? Because considering the situations in terms of our bodhicitta or bodhisattva resolve, these commitments hold us back from pursuing our practice, especially morality, in a coherent and stable manner. Our concern for our body, in other words, acts as a powerful impediment or blockage to the secure evolution of our path of virtue itself. It waylays us. The fact that Shantideva anthropomorphically addresses directly our mind, as one does a fully fledged person, if you notice the form of the address in this verse is very interesting, is at once humorous, at least to a carefully calculated degree, and deeply significant. It is a recognition that it is none other than our mind and its medley of attachments that have power to cause us to stray. Our mind, if it's uncontrolled, is the manipulative master of distractions, in other words, the tyrannical despot dragging us along behind, unless tamed. Shantideva's vivid evocation of our body's impermanence via the deliberately macabre, or is that entirely natural, image of vultures pecking out our eyes and drawing out our intestines through a hole they have dug with their beaks in our already bloated abdomens, is therefore deliberately theatrical in its staging. I could sort of say, I was thinking to myself, it's actually cinematic, isn't it? It's like a good B-grade gore horror film. Everything is being spelt out here so that nothing, the shock cannot escape our notice. It's quite deliberate on Shantideva's part. It's to emphasize his dialectical intent. He's really trying to drive a point home. And that point has to be driven through layers after layer after layer of defensive mechanisms that prevent us from acknowledging the sheer simplicity, if you like, of our radical impermanence. We're disintegrating moment to moment, and we're definitely going to die. So this stanza swings on a bizarre juxtaposition, but one which we indeed do need to entertain or occupy. The body, which we treasure because of its promise to perform as a trusty servant of sensual satisfaction, even if not also outright or rampant greed, is in fact the very body that is doomed or destined to be fed to the vultures, if not the maggots in the ground or the flames in a funeral pyre. But blinded by our quest for sensual gratification, together with our vain attachment to our bodies themselves, we are incapable of allowing ourselves to recognize this all too obvious pending fact. It is only when self-blinded in this way to our own fundamental impermanence, predicated as it is on a body that is disintegrating and deteriorating every microscopic moment, that we might be said to be made to be not mentally unhappy, as Shantideva puts it. This kind of provisional not being mentally unhappiness is a precarious, painfully provisional species of happiness, because it's resting on flawed foundations, a flawed premise, in other words. Because we simply do not allow ourselves to envisage this carnivorous spectacle of our own body as still bleeding, perhaps carrion, to quell the hunger of scavengers. We allow ourselves the indulgence of a shallow facsimile mental happiness, one that is not happiness at all, because it is no more than a bulwark, predicated and thus indebted to a desperate defensive mechanism. And in any case, it's an example of the suffering of change. So the sad case is that though we have indeed engaged in a willful case of mental blockage, trying to deny that this body is not reliable and falling apart, we nonetheless somehow seek to willfully twist the situation around by indulging and thus further feeding the desires arising in dependence on our still living body. And we orchestrate this in such a fashion that these very desires are asked to themselves camouflage or obscure the pending terminal reality of our situation. It's like we sort of rushed to a paradisical Club Med somewhere where we don't appear to age and we're all busily drinking cocktails. We're too frightened to put the cocktail glass down in case we discover that our Club Med isn't a safe haven at all. Someone's left the gate open or the door open. So we're trying to sort of bluff ourselves, in other words. So in a weird, twisted way, from the perspective of the self-cherishing mind, indulging in attachment to our body is conceived as a boon or a gain because it insulates, as I mentioned, or shields us, or rather appears to do so, from our body's actual destiny, its terminal fate. And together with this, the fact that with our body's destruction, we are poised to be helplessly hurled into the next rebirth according to the exigencies of our karmic accumulation. But when we do consider the situation more deeply, more objectively, more realistically, that is, by peeling away the layers of this camouflage, thereby exposing the pathological layers that constitute this denial, we arrive at the following question. Why is it that we don't allow recognition that our body is a rotten, impure corpse just waiting to happen? Why don't we allow this to filter in, this realization? Just why are we so enamored and so heavily invested in achieving acutely short-term goals deployed through and around a body that is about to betray us? And I came up with an analogy here, which I've thought twice about. But I'm going to go ahead. This refusal to acknowledge what's going on is similar to that of a vain old man still wearing a reverse baseball cap, yet conscious that he has a diagnosed serious heart condition and shouldn't physically overexert himself, who nonetheless dies of a heart attack while in the throes of passionate sex. Sort of colourful image, a playful image. The example fits Shantideva's verse because this man denies the vulnerability and the permanence of his body via the weird device of actually indulging it as a device for optimizing short-term pleasure. Such indulgence is narcissistically serving as a screen to obscure from himself his actual old age, his vulnerability, in other words. This truly makes him a foolish man. In this case, he dies by stint of his own foolishness. So I'm not trying to make a broader comment there, but I'm just sort of thought it's a vivid example, isn't it? We've all got our own equivalents. Gyaltsabje sums up the verse's intent. When one is dead, then, although the vultures push and pull the body back and forth amongst them out of attachment for it, you do not generate dislike. Why then are you attached to the body now and object? It is unsuitable to be attached. So without unduly labouring the point, I feel we can carry the import of this verse over as a form of cultural analysis into our current consumer culture with its extensive propaganda machinery designed to get us to consume, with its extensive propaganda machinery sort of supporting that by repeating it over and over and over again. Right now, even as our planet enters what appears to be runaway global warming and begins to burn. This is the same disjunct logic that is informing the behaviour of the sex-starved old man, isn't it? Short-term consumption and bugger the long-term implications, not just for ourselves, but for all emerging generations. Recognition of this kind of folly is fueling youth activist groups, movements around the world. You know, the old man is the old generations who are persisting in looting the planet for short-term gain, which they're feeding themselves in a state of pleasure and bugger the rest. It's a real problem. The next verse extends the meaning and therefore falls under the same subheading, why it's unsuitable to be attached to the body. Verse 60 reads, holding this body as mine, why, mind, do you guard it so? Since you and it will separate, what use can it be to you? And we might add, what use can it be to you right now? Because immediate gratification, as the last verse emphasized, is our favored modus operandi. The last line, holding this body as mine, carries within it a Madhyamika analysis. How so? We only hold this body, which is not inherently mine, as a real mine, through the force of innate self-grasping that hold I and mine to be real objectively from their own sides. We believe and hold that this mine somehow inheres and is findable in the base upon which we label mine. So this is where the Madhyamika analysis would come in. Even then, it's not actually mine. It is only held to be so as we consider our body our possession. So our body becomes mine when we hold it to be mine, and then we cling to it as really mine. This is a problem. In reality, there is nothing from the side of the body that is truly or really possessed. For example, when we urinate, our bodily liquid waste simply tumbles out and goes frothing down the drain. This separation would not be possible if the urine was intrinsically mine. Likewise with solid food and feces. Our relationship or possession of them, if inherently existent, could never cease, could never be severed. And I've mentioned this a number of times throughout the talks, but it's often a very poignant example for me. I'm a stem cell recipient transplant patient. I'm now producing blood on the basis of someone else's stem cells that are now lodged in my marrow, or that produce the marrow that they've lodged themselves into. Yet, somehow, through the force of habitually thinking of this body as mine, a real mine, really mine, I cling to it in inappropriate ways. Thus, that we do seek to guard the body and believe in it so ferociously is dependent upon innate self-grasping ignorance. And because the body is not innately ours and is produced by causes and conditions, and therefore is by nature impermanent, returning to Shantideva's verse, then there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that will prevent me one day from being separated from it. There is no intrinsic relationship between me and my body that's going to withstand causes and conditions whatsoever. The body won't even bother to look back to say goodbye. I may have been committed to thoroughly serving the body in all sorts of myriad ways throughout a lifetime, but the body from its side has never had any real regard for me. As Sabje says, since both you and this body are distinct from one another, you will leave this body behind very quickly, and the body will also abandon you. Hence, What is it doing for you? This is Samjay's rhetorical question, which is Shantideva's rhetorical question. Hence, what is it doing for you? It is unsuitable to hold it as mine. End of quote. So even on this level of recognizing the body's impermanence in ordinary everyday terms, we can appreciate that it is inappropriate to call it mine or claim it as mine, especially definitively, because it is destined to slip away, fall like sand or ashes from our grasp. All this comes home to roost, obviously, or most obviously, when our body stops working and begins to shut down, to fail mechanically, and dies. Geshe Doga makes the point in his commentary on this verse that on this basis alone it is unsuitable to call this body mine. The final problem then, the cognitive problem or the afflictive problem, is therefore not the body itself, and I think we should be clear about this, but our exaggerated, distorted relationship with it. Our current gross physical body has never been and will never be intrinsically linked or harnessed with our mind. It was always distinct from it. If this wasn't the case, our death would not be possible, let alone our rebirth, which relies obviously on taking a new body. On that basis, we call it rebirth. Rebirth wouldn't be possible if this body wasn't going to depart. How come we can't bring ourselves to a realization of this simple fact? And why should arriving at or even stumbling upon such a realization prove so alarming, perhaps terrifyingly so? Why indeed, quoting Shantideva, do we seek to guard it so? It is only attachment. This is Shantideva's main underlying point. It is only attachment that makes us fear separation from our body. Our body, even in terms of ordinary conventional analysis, is nothing more than a temporary vessel with skin on the outside and stuff, gunk, on the inside, gunk that is always swapping over and passing through, supported on the way by a medley of organs, of interlocked organs such as heart, kidneys, livers, stomach, intestines, etc., all of which are capable of collapsing and failing, often in sequential order. We call this organ failure and seek to forestall the collapse with expensive life support machines. When all is said and done, the body, our human body, is really just a tube with a hole at either end, one for taking nourishment in and the other for passing waste products out. To lapse Darwinian for a moment, we might say that we are a primordial worm that has evolved several external appendages to extend our operational repertoire. There's a sci-fi scenario for you. With genetic engineering and recombinant gene splicing, we might even see a time when citizens will be reduced to wet tubes suspended in amniotic sacs in rows in specially constructed and hermetically sealed biological warehouses deemed valuable to construct and maintain because of those wet, electrically charged, involuted glands we call brains, which will be mechanically and operationally linked to all sorts of external devices. Wet organic computers, in other words. To be suspended in rows of slightly warm liquid vats for financial gain. Cultural theorists refer to this exciting technological scientific prospect as post-human. Very interesting, this term. There's nothing inherent in the human condition, looking at it from this point of view, that prevents this body to be modified in ways that will make it unrecognizable as a human body. We have an artist in Australia called Patricia Piccinini, who creates very realistic sculptures, incredibly realistic sculptures of a sort of humanoid pig-like beings, suckling pig-like humanoids on her multiple rows of nipples. So she's at once familiar and unfamiliar. We identify with her, but we're also conscious that there are aspects that shouldn't be there. And this is, within a step away from a scientific experimental point of view as we speak. So as science zooms ahead, we're indeed left with the lingering problem: just what is a human body? And along with this, just what constitutes the human, or the human animal, if we take contemporary animal philosophy into account. So I just throw these situations out there because they're sort of pertinent. In terms of outline, we now move to the second subheading, meditating on the impurity of the body. Verse 61. Why, confused mind, do you not hold onto a clean wooden form? Just what is the point of guarding this putrid, dirt-filled machine? Sonam Semmo captures Shantideva's argument perfectly. And it's an argument or a logic that plays directly upon and confounds the illogic of our confused mind. He says, the first two lines indicate that it is illogical not to grasp something considered pure. The second two lines indicate that it is illogical to grasp something considered impure. End of quote. Having eliminated the only possible options in this way, we are to dismiss grasping onto the putrid, dirt-filled body per se. This is likened, or that it is likened to a machine, is to highlight its non-sentient qualities. It is just so much operational stuff. But we sentimentalize the body, humanize it, as it were, and endow it with qualities that exceed what it actually has. So according to the first two lines, why do we hold onto the impure, dirty body when we could instead hold onto something clean, such as a polished wooden doll, perhaps even one resembling a body, a mannequin, in other words, because it lacks a self. And according to the second, why do we insist on holding onto this putrid, dirt-filled machine? Geltsabbje captures the combined logic. Answer: if you, the deluded mind, that holds that which lacks a self as having a self, holds the impure as mine, then why do you not hold a clean piece of wood as I as well? Instead, you guard this machine, which is an accumulation of filth and bones. How can this be suitable? It is unsuitable to be attached. Geshe Doga comments, a further means to overcome attachment to the body is to contemplate the natural defects of the body. This particularly relates to attachment to the bodies of others, such as when men are attached to a woman's body or a woman is attached to a man's body. This attachment seems to arise purely by focusing on attractiveness of the body itself. As a gay man, I have to adjust this account. Indeed, the fact that even as a boy I was attracted to male bodies already inculcated in me an awareness that desire itself was not intrinsically established. This is a real impact for me as a young boy. It just wasn't the same. Therefore, it couldn't be inherently natural the way it appeared to be. It would have to be everywhere, always. My reading of Freud also taught me that according to the performative structures of fetishism, it was possible to even find a shoe stolen from someone's wardrobe and preferably recently worn, sexually gratifying. That was why Freud, perhaps in a moment of droll wit, declared that fetishists were the most erotically satisfied of all, as they obtained their, when they obtained their desire object, they were always guaranteed satisfaction. That's a quote from Freud. It's a wonderful, wonderful quote, isn't it? Much less problematic than an erotic fixation on a person, so much more complicated and unreliable. Or we might further go to propose that desire is by nature fetishistic. Certainly, we can also talk of commodity fetishism, which is an extension of the same thing. What makes one mobile phone or one sports car sexier than another? That automobile ads for sports cars are draped with usually sexy women is no accident. Anyhow, Geshe Doga's account still perfectly holds, as he is merely giving characteristic examples of desire focused on the bodies of others, not just upon our desire for our own body, which is also in play. Anyhow, the natural defects of the body are that it is impure. It's a constituted example of pervasive suffering, and it's also impermanent. Therefore, the faults of the body must be meditated upon in a mindful way to overcome our attachment. And this can be done, for example, through the 4 mindful establishments based on the Satipatthana Sutta. But those presentations are also found in the Mahayana lineages. And Shantideva himself presents them in the wisdom chapter of Guide to a Bodhisattva Life, 67 to 87, which comprehensively present how to apply mindfulness to our body. That's not the scope today to elaborate, but I'm pointing out the direction for further investigation. For example, verse 87 concludes, all form, our body's a form, all form therefore is like a dream, and who will be attached to it, who thus investigates? The body in this way has no existence. What is male, therefore, and what is female? At the end of his own summary account, Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen says, this is Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's commentary on the mindfulness of the body. He says, through meditating on the establishment of the mindfulness of the body, we will know the polluted body to have the nature of karmically produced dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. And this relates, of course, to the truth of suffering. This means our body, because it's constituted from afflicted causes, will naturally, inverted commas, incline towards suffering, just as a tree inclines in the direction of the wind. Our body is the truth of suffering. How then can it be a natural or inevitable source of pleasure or purity? Shantideva says, verse 84, chapter 9, as long as the conditions are assembled, a body will appear and seem to be a man. As long as all the parts are likewise present, it's there that we will see a body. The conclusion here is that though the body lacks existence from its own side, it does nonetheless appear over there in dependence on being imputed upon the perceivable available parts, arms, legs, fingers, toes, eyes, nose, etc. I had a little passage here. I'll just sort of summarize it. I jumped, when I was thinking about this, I jumped to the feminist theorist Elizabeth Proben proposing that we sex human bodies in dependence on an identification of the bits and pieces in the same way that we sex chickens. So in an industrial factory environment, chickens are sexed and the males go off on one conveyor belt and the egg-laying females, which are the valuable ones from the egg production point of view, go off on another conveyor belt. And so their pathways don't meet again, all based on this tiny observation of an anatomical difference, minor, who knows, anatomical difference. So this kind of way of thinking about how bodies are made to be the bearers of meaning does require some investigation and some analysis. Anyhow, our next heading. Our next heading is contemplating the lack of essence of the body, and it covers a sequence or a suite of interlocked verses, 62 to 70, all presenting vital aspects of how we are to meditate. Subheadings assist in pinpointing what it is exactly that we're doing in each case. So these verses come under the heading, if one separates the different parts of the body and analyzes them, one will not find any essence. By way of framing these verses, Geshe-Doga says, by meditating on the natural defects of the body and imperfections of the body in this way, one will be able to implement it into one's practice. Therefore, these verses are going to engage in a systematic, analytical dismantling of the body's integrity, its integrity as an apparently coherent entity, a unified totality, or a kind of seamless unity, if you like, considered in conventional terms. So Shantideva here, and this is an important point, is not concerned at the moment to be engaging in what I described in the last talk as an ultimate analysis. He wants to see what happens when we surgically dissect what's here, and then to ask the question, do we still desire our body if we actually look at it as a deconstructed massive stuff? And this meditational strategy has deep origins in the Buddhist tradition. For example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, which I mentioned earlier, we find the following clinical deconstruction of the body's constituents. So I quote, in this very body, from the soles of the feet up, from the crown of the head down, surrounded by skin, full of these various mean impurities, he reviews thus. So we now itemize: head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, membranes, spleen, lungs, gut, gorge, dung, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spit, snot, joints, urine, to which is added also brain in the skull to make up 32 parts. And then the text goes, in this very body, from the soles of the feet up, from the crown of the head down, surrounded by skin, full of these various mean impurities, he reviews thus. So the logic is that while we might indeed lust after a beautiful, radiant body with unblemished skin and shimmering hair and elegant limbs and so forth, it is all together more challenging to lust after bile, phlegm, fat, grease, spit, snot, joints, urine, etc., with equal fervour. The impact of considering the body in this analytically deconstructed manner is intended to knock desire off its well-worn tracks. Rather than voraciously and sort of automatically, enthusiastically advance to obtain our quarry, which is what we normally do. Instead, having done this meditation, we might have cause to pause, if not to step back. So there is also a classic meditation on the body's impermanence called meditation on bones. Quote, bones in a pattern ordered, standing end to end, with many joints whose shaping on no one does depend, by sinews held together, menaced by aging's threat, incognizant, resembling a wooden marionette. And additionally, we have a famous contemplation of the body as though it was already found rotting in the charnel grounds. And I quote, again, a bhikkhu judges this same body as though he was looking at bodily remains thrown on a charnel ground, bones without sinews scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, there a shin bone, there a thigh bone, there a hip bone, there a backbone, there a rib bone, there a breastbone, there an arm bone, there a shoulder bone, there a neck bone, there a jawbone, there a tooth bone, there the skull. It continues, the body too is of such a nature. It will be like that. It will not be exempt from that. In this way, he abides contemplating the body as a body in himself, or he abides contemplating the body as a body externally, or he abides contemplating the body as a body in himself and externally, or else he abides contemplating in the body its arising factors, or he abides contemplating the body in its vanishing factors, or he abides contemplating the body in its arising and vanishing factors, or else mindfulness that there is a body is simply established in him to the extent of bare acknowledgement and remembrance of it while he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And in the Dhammapada we find, see this body beautiful, a mass of sores, a congeries, considered but miserable, where nothing is stable, nothing persists, all decrepit is this body. Diseases nest and frail. This foul mass is broken up. Indeed, life ends in death. So these quotes are actually drawn from Cantipalo's book, published in 1980, if anyone's interested, called A Bag of Bones, a miscellany on the body. And it's available as a free downloadable PDF if you wish to follow it up. So I'm now going to very quietly read out the verses, but I'm wanting us to sort of in our own way meditate on those verses as we go. So I'll just simply recite the verses and then occasionally have a thought or two added. So just taking in mind the topic, which has become increasingly confronting, perhaps, deliberately so, Shantideva's purpose. I think that we're going to meditate on the body. So firstly, if one separates the many different parts of the body and analyzes them, one will not find any essence. 62. First of all, mentally separate the layers of skin from the flesh. And then with a scalpel of discrimination, separate the flesh from the skeletal frame. '63. And having split open even the bones, look right down to the marrow. While examining this, ask yourself, where is the essence? And meditating in this way provokes the following reflection. 64. If, even when searching with such effort, you can apprehend no essence, then why, with so much attachment, are you still guarding this body now? This is a very real question. As the immediate emphasis is clearly on overcoming attachment to our own body, we're being pushed here to consider how so much of our daily activity and affairs are dedicated to worshipping and protecting this body, anointing it with expensive lotions and so forth. So Shantideva pushes on relentlessly the reason why it's unsuitable to be attached to the body. And he's now raising a hypothetical argument which we're to examine mindfully. 65. What use is this body to you? If its dirty insides are unfit for you to eat, if its blood is not fit to drink, and its intestines are not fit to be sucked, so the shock factor is a deliberate rhetorical device here. We are indeed to feel a visceral response when contemplating in this way. And the next heading, because the body disintegrates quickly, it is suitable to practice virtue. Yeshidoga prefaces the next verse. We're still meditating. From the heading itself, we can derive a sense of the profound advice being presented. Since death is inevitable, at which time our body disintegrates and nothing is left behind, then while we have this body, it is suitable to engage it to accumulate virtue as much as possible. 66 reads, "At second best, it is only fit to be guarded in order to feed the vultures and jackals. Truly, this body of a human being should be employed only in the practice of virtue." And then the caveat in verse 67. "But should you instead guard it with attachment, then what will you be able to do when it is stolen by the unsympathetic Lord of Death and given to the gods and the birds?" And now an example of how it's inappropriate to do nothing and to procrastinate due to grasping. 68. If servants are not given clothing and so forth, when they are unable to be employed, then why do you exhaust yourself looking after the flesh alone, when even though caring for the body, it goes elsewhere? Next heading, having given a wage, one should get what one wants. 69. Now having paid my body its wages, meaning we've fed it and tended to it and so forth, I shall engage it in making my life meaningful. But if my body is of no benefit, then I shall not give it anything. And the culmination of this suite of verses, it is appropriate to work for sentient beings by adapting the recognition of a boat. And the verse reads, "I should conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going, and in order to benefit all others, transform it into a wish-fulfilling body." So in this way, we arrive at the resolve not to be attached to our body, not to meaninglessly disregard it or abuse it in any way, but rather to utilize it in the most skillful, imaginable way possible to benefit other sentient beings. So when Shantideva refers to transforming it into a wish-fulfilling body, he's referring to the three wish-fulfilling bodies of a Buddha: the Nirmanakaya, the form body or body of transformation; the Sambhogakaya, the emanation body or the body of enjoyment; and the Dharmakaya, referring to the ultimate reality of the enlightened mind together with its emptiness. So from the Dharmakaya, the Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya forms manifest spontaneously in whatever form is most suitable and most available to benefit suffering sentient beings. This is a wish-fulfilling body, totally without flaw, totally pure, miraculous in its reach. So with that, we conclude that cycle of meditations. I wanted when I was preparing the talk, I was sort of conscious it sort of is hard-hitting, and I'm also conscious that I'm steering against the current in lots of ways with body affirmation culture, which has many important and often worthy dimensions to consider. So I want to firstly advise that these meditations are perhaps not to be done by those struggling with mental issues, particularly psychoses. But it might also be the case for those who are depressive or manic in some way. This is because it runs certain risks of triggering distress and aggravating those conditions. I notice on YouTube recently, there's a whole lot of videos coming out about the dangers of meditation leading to so-called mental illness. And so these are important topics to acknowledge. And it's not that meditation itself causes the problems, but that someone who's perhaps a little bit vulnerable, a little bit susceptible, may find the intensity and the acute scalpel-like methodology of these meditations quite confronting and even scary and in some ways destructive. And that's not the fault of the meditation. It's just that some meditations aren't perhaps the best things to be doing by some people at some times. And so we need to be discriminating here. So I wouldn't recommend these meditations perhaps for someone who's struggling with body dysmorphia or low body esteem. I hate my fat, clumsy, embarrassing body, etc. Rather, these meditations are intended for true seekers ready and able to embark on the Bodhisattva's path to full enlightenment. So we need to determine how robust we actually are as we look at these things. And I want to mention here an example that occurred a number of years ago, but I haven't forgotten. During the presentation of this suite of verses at Tara Institute, a particular female student who was sitting in the back of the hall, meditation hall, in great distress, asked Geshe Doga a question: how can I possibly do these meditations? She was clearly really agitated. And there's a background story there. This particular person had struggled for many years with eating disorders. It was an ongoing issue for her. Geshe Doga just let the matter sit for a bit, and then he leant forward and said in the most warm and beautiful way, "You, dear, should meditate on yourself as Tara, with a pure body and with a pure mind." And at that point, she sat back with a smile and released all of that tension. So this is surely advice that we can also take on board according to our own personal situation. In short, it's perfectly okay to focus on these meditations and techniques if we can see that they are conducive to our practice. If we attempt, on the other hand, practices that are too challenging or too hard, we will hesitate and stall in our spiritual pursuits and possibly even abandon them altogether. And this would be a great loss indeed. So I want to raise here the issue of the tantric approach. It's worth noting that the manner in which Tantra navigates the body is different in significant ways, not focusing on its natural faults and imperfections, etc., but as a precious vehicle of transformation, of purity, of perfectibility, by utilizing subtle energy channels and winds and so forth, and their accompanying consciousnesses, etc. Lama Yeshe, in Introduction to Tantra, the most wonderful introduction to Tantra, says, and I quote, "Generally speaking, we can say that all the many practices of Tantra involve the principle of transformation. As modern science has demonstrated, the physical universe with its infinite variety of phenomena, from the smallest subatomic particle to the largest galaxy, is an unceasing state of transformation and evolution from one form of energy to another. Our own body and mind are also energy, and whether we are healthy or ill, mentally balanced or berserk, depends on whether our mental and physical energies are harmonious or not. Through the proper practice of Tantra, all our energies, including the subtle yet very powerful energies that we're not normally aware of, are harnessed to accomplish the greatest of all transformations. This is an evolution from an ordinary, limited and deluded person trapped within the shell of a petty ego into a fully evolved, totally conscious being of unlimited compassion and insight. How can we achieve such an extraordinary transformation? Where will we find the necessary resources to bring about such a profound change? We do not have far to look. We do not have to extract this force from the nucleus of an atom, nor do we have to take a rocket ship into outer space and find it in some distant star. Instead, the basic energy involved in this profound process of tantric transformation is the energy of our own desires. Lama Yeshe also says a little bit further on, compared to this gradual sutra approach, Tantrayana is a far speedier path to enlightenment. Although tantric practitioners do not neglect creating the same causes as the followers of sutra, they take the future result of full spiritual evolution as the very starting point in their path. This is what it means visualizing myself as the deity involves. To put this in other words, the tantric yogi or yogini, as these supremely skillful practitioners are called in Sanskrit, learns to think, speak, and act now as if he or she were already a fully enlightened being. Because this powerful approach brings the future result of full awakening into the present moment of spiritual practice, Tantra is therefore sometimes called the resultant vehicle to enlightenment. End of quote. So to imagine one's body as already enlightened and in the form of a deity opens out an immense scope for development, as it allows us, as Lama Yeshe so vividly said, to step outside the usual strangulating confines of our egoic relationship, including our egoic relationship to our body. But this said, one is not equipped to practice Tantra unless performed on the basis of the three principles of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom realizing emptiness. His Holiness makes it clear that renunciation is incumbent upon realizing true suffering and true causes of suffering, referring to the first two noble truths. His Holiness says, when we think about suffering and the true origin of suffering, and we come to an understanding of the two truths, we will generate a wish to get rid ourselves of suffering and its causes. In other words, because we dislike true suffering and know the true origin of suffering, we will generate a wish to reject them. This is the determination to be free. This wish for definite emergence, to be free, is renunciation. His Holiness adds that our compassion for others is also dependent on this same realization. He says, when you carefully consider suffering, it is not only you who are under its power, but other sentient beings also suffer in the same way. Then you should think that as other sentient beings are suffering just like me, how marvelous it would be if they could also eliminate suffering and its causes. Such a wish for other sentient beings to eliminate suffering and its causes is called compassion. And when, induced by compassion, you decide that you can help them eradicate or eliminate suffering and its causes, That is the special resolve of the mind that wishes actively to benefit other sentient beings. So therefore, end of quote, without comprehending, swinging us right back to Shantideva. You see a magpie outside my window there. Therefore, without comprehending how our current body, thrown as it is by afflicted karma delusion, is naturally endowed with suffering, as I mentioned earlier, we will be incapable of generating such renunciation and thus also a powerful compassion intent on releasing others from suffering. If we don't know how we're suffering and how the body's involved in that, how on earth are we going to generate a genuine compassion for others? We don't know what we're going to wanting to rescue them from, let alone where we want to rescue them to. We're not going to have any clarity of purpose whatsoever. His Holiness gives the example of how Shakyamuni Buddha had to forgo bodily pleasures, sexual pleasures, in order to step away from the privileged life of princedom, which he'd come to recognize as a stifling cage. And I quote, he was born a prince in a wealthy family, was well educated, had a wife and son, and enjoyed all imaginable worldly pleasures. Yet despite the alluring pleasures available to him, when he came across instances of the suffering of birth, sickness, old age, and death, he was provoked by the sight of the suffering of others. He discovered for himself that no matter how attractive external comforts may be, so long as you have a physical body like ours, which is the short-lived product of contaminated action and delusion, then such attractive external pleasures are illusory. Understanding this, he tried to find a path to liberation from suffering by renouncing all worldly pleasures, including family life with his wife and son. Through gradually increasing his determination to be free in this way, he was able to attain not only liberation, but enlightenment. So this is how we can arrive at Tsongkhapa's instructions in Three Principles of the Path to block the attraction to the captivating appearances of this life. Only in this way can we begin to recognize that most precious of gems, our precious human rebirth, winding right back to the beginning of the standards that we're examining with Shantideva at the same time here. Pabonka Rinpoche says, we are permanent inhabitants of the deepest reaches within the ocean of cyclic existence. A human body, complete with leisure and fortune, will be fantastically hard to find. The odds against it are almost infinite. But this time we have found one. So our life of leisure and fortune is incredibly valuable and difficult to find. This is the first and the last time we will ever have such a chance. We must now make the greatest use of it. The single highest thing we can do with this life is to practice the greater way. End of quote. So the greater way here referring to the Bodhisattva's path. From this we can take away two essential things. While attachment to our afflicted body is to be surrendered, we are surrendering not just our afflicted body in that sense, but we're surrendering our attachment to it at the same time. We're nonetheless to utilize our current human body, and urgently so, in order to practice the Bodhisattva path. This is exactly what Shantideva is also pointing to when he says in verse 70, which I quote again, I should conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going, and in order to benefit all others, transform it into a wish-fulfilling jewel. The use of the qualifier mere here, a mere support for coming and going, indicates that we're not to exaggeratedly regard the body as something more than it actually is, or for that matter, as something less than it actually is. We're not being asked to put our body down absolutely at all. We're not to bloat it up with all kinds of qualities and virtues that it doesn't have, but at the same time, we're not to loathe and reject it, or even injure it and neglect it. Rather, we're to protect and care for it as a precious tool, an instrument, if you like, for conveying us, a vehicle, as Shantideva was saying, for conveying us along in our practice. It is the perfect basis for transporting us closer to enlightenment. For example, we perform acts of generosity, I'm talking about physical generosity here, by extending, I'm demonstrating, we extend our hand and release the object into the possession of the other person through our body. This act would not be possible if we didn't have a body that could instrumentalize that act. We speak soothing words to those in distress with our teeth, tongue, and throat. We watch with our eyes to see who is greatly suffering and then work out or mobilize how we can best approach them with some form of support or help. Considered as an instrument of bodhicitta in this way, our relationship to our body is radically transformed. Moreover, it is said that even seeing the body of a bodhisattva, someone who has obtained realizations, will bring immense benefits to suffering beings' minds, because that object, that bodhisattva's body, is so virtuous. It's the product of virtue in all sorts of extraordinary ways. It has a sort of power to benefit merely by seeing it with the eye. This is an extraordinary idea. So I might leave it there because I had a few more passages, but I think they effectively cover the same point. So I've tried to tackle the topic from a number of angles because I realized if I left it in its sort of raw, bleeding hunk of meat state, we might sort of walk away with some trouble hanging over in our minds. So I'll throw it open now to any comments or questions or reflections. Yeah. Stephen?
Oh, thank you, Ross. Thank you for a wonderful teaching tonight. And I just wanted to say, and this goes back to last week's episode that you kindly made and posted for us, is that you mentioned that, well, you're doing the supplement to the last course, but in a way you were doing a supplements to supplements.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, last week, but also especially this week, that I really enjoyed kind of the free form way you approached it. Like you say, approaching the topic, which is very confronting. You approach the topic in different directions. We had like a brief meditation period,
Mm-hmm.
different, readings from the Satipatthana Sutra or from the lists of 32 parts and so on. So I really enjoyed that a lot. And I think I just like to say, I think a lot of people are enjoying your class. They're not all here, but even though the last class was posted just a few days ago, there's been more than 50 people who have taken a look at it. So that's
wonderful.
That's just my comment there.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to hear. Thank you. And you notice there, I didn't go into as much depth as I might have otherwise have liked, but I touched on the feminist dimensions of this topic too, and I haven't spelt them out, but I do know from my own intense research as a PhD student, the importance of feminist theory and the particular value of feminist rewritings of the body, and particularly the maternal body. The feminists sort of say, rather than worship a disembodied God out there as the origin of life, we should be worshipping the womb of the mother from which we have sprung. There's a kind of need to return to the reality of our embodiment here. And so the ways in which culture has misogynistically denigrated, while at the same time worshipping in extreme ways female bodies, has operated as a toxic mechanism of control, social control. And there's a real need for investigation and change there. So some feminist theories have put forward a very direct critique of what we call Cartesian dualism, the kind of I think, therefore I am logic, which has informed much of contemporary Western philosophy, and with its flows over into politics and social constructions of the various kinds, because it leaves the body out of the equation. And so we speak as embodied subjects. And of course, when we look at the plight and the role of migrants and refugees fleeing borders and so forth, the politicization of the body is a very real thing. It's used to weaponize certain bodies and to exclude certain bodies, and with it certain human subjects in this case. And so these are real topics. And so I'm not suggesting that a Buddhist approach somehow eclipses or supersedes these issues. I think we do, as Stephen was sort of pointing out, we do need a comprehensive, sophisticated take on these questions. And I think it's perfectly legitimate and, in fact, absolutely necessary that we do undertake these kinds of investigations fearlessly in an informed way, because it's through that we achieve some stable understanding. We're meant to be becoming stable like Mount Meru. So we don't want to be thrown by someone's comment about a female body as being a sort of an object of disgust. We think of menstrual taboos, for example, women being excluded from social intercourse in some cultures while they're menstruating. What is going on in these sorts of constructions? It's fascinating to develop some sort of awareness of these issues. But at the same time, Shantideva's literally peeling us back to the bone, and our own attachment to our body, if unreflective, is a very powerful agent of self control in a kind of bottled up, inhibited way. It really blocks us from transforming in the way that Lama Yeshe was talking about. Yeah.
If I might, so for
So
me,
who's speaking?
I'm sorry, this is Sheila.
Oh, Sheila, yeah.
So I obviously, as a woman, I understand, but I also wonder if by focusing too much on male or female body, if we are maybe claiming, or what is the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like we're attaching our being attached to the feminine body or the masculine body, and I often wonder, I have broken through the glass ceiling. I have been the first female to do blank, and well, at least for me, I found that I focused way too much in the beginning on the differences, and I think that I became a very angry person, and I didn't like that person. So I do like the idea of, whether it's male or female, removing the mind from the body. And so
Yeah.
I honestly feel like we can go both ways. I think it's very, very important. I'm not discounting. I think it's very important that, women have, they're able to, gosh, my brain has just stopped. But, we need to be able to speak for ourselves. We need to be able to choose, how, for our bodies.
Mhm.
Also, I think, I hope in time that it will no longer be male or female, and that we will just be beings instead of the male or the female or
Mhm.
gender that we choose. That we will just be beings and remove that one
Mhm.
more label from that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It makes absolute sense. And I was just thinking while you were sort of picturing that situation, how in an important way, compassion cuts through all that. It already cuts through. So it's not concerned whether you're male or female, or in a good body or a bad body, or this or that, at all. It's concerned for your situation in terms of whether or not you are struggling or suffering. And so it sees candidly what's there. It cuts straight through. And so we could then argue, if that's the case, that these other investigations or political situations, if you like, are part of supporting us to develop a more cohesive compassion that doesn't get thrown by superficial data, which is what you're talking about. Why should I relate differently to someone, whether they're male or female? What on earth is going on in my head that enables me to think of doing that? There's a person there. Can't I see them? Can't I actually apprehend what's there? And can't I embrace the need to protect and not hurt them without having to know what gender they are, or whether they're this or that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what I meant by compassion cuts through. So in that way, I think these other explorations support this idea of a genuinely unbiased compassion, impartial. Doesn't mean it's not concerned, it's not nonchalant or anything. It's completely concerned, but it's unable to be deflected by prejudice or short-sightedness in whatever form it takes.
I agree 100%. I think that was
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you. I hope one day, as a world, as beings, that we can remove those labels, and that we can just be compassionate to one another.
Mm.
To
Yeah.
a Hispanic female, or
Yes. We have, each country seems to have its own version of those scenarios, and we're seeing a swing to the right in Europe at the moment. It's based on almost Nazi party principles, ex-Nazi party sort of sons and daughters about to seize the reins. And so they're troubling times. And so we live in this world that's in turmoil. And so for me, the idea of being firm and resolute in a sort of aspiring Bodhisattva practice is a great clarifier and very, what's the word for it, relaxing in a way, because it takes the energy out of so many of those turmoils. We can still see and we can still be responsive. I'm not suggesting we become detached at all. Yeah. Well, we might finish there. There's certainly a lot of food for thought, isn't there, in these topics? And there's also the issue that I didn't sort of raise, that Shantideva was ostensibly teaching to Sangha, all ordained Sangha, who have taken vows not to engage in sexual activities, for example. And so how do you sort of somehow take the energy out of those desires so that those people can live and maintain their vows? And so this is also there in Shantideva's purpose. And so we need to also work out how to translate that to our own situations. And I actually, see if I can get it back. I just finished my prepared talk on a note here. I'll just mention here. It's appropriate to protect our human body, but only so that it can be used to benefit others. Therefore, if we're addicted to gyms and bodybuilding or beauty salons with hundreds of colored enamels for painting fake fingernails and so forth, we have to investigate a little further. As Shantideva says in verse 68, hence, if this body leaves you despite your care, why do you then build up your flesh to make it firm? So I was just amused by that because I immediately thought of gyms and gym culture. And people are desperately engaged with their gyms. They're a religion. They're a major force. And I'm not saying one shouldn't go to the gym, but if one goes to the gym to be fit, that's fantastic. But at what point does that become a kind of another process entirely of trying to build up this ideal body that's somehow going to enable the world to open up in new ways? That kind of thinking is very problematic. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand over now to Lou to conclude with the prayers. Thank you, Lou.
For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide, dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures weapon solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, to whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, lead all living beings.
You may have frozen, so I'll finish and lead
Thank you.
all living beings without exception into that light state. Lou, are you back?
Yes, you can't hear me?
There you
We
go.
can now, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not yet arisen rise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's light be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until psychic existence is ended. Long life prayer, a prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher and assembly of children, of victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with the lineage, all the opposite of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway with which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare, victorious one's teachings, and mother living beings, we suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the oceans of three jewels, the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, made a smile of a new reincarnation, swiftly beaming glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you very much. I just want to mention, as I'm sure you already know, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is making a trip to America as we speak. He'll be there on the weekend to have some surgery on his knees. And so many of the centers are doing medicine Buddha practice. So to keep this in mind over the next few days, to dedicate very strongly for the success of those surgical procedures. So thank you very much. Good night.